Hey everybody, we're going to start section 2.3. It's just an extension of the last section about statements and where we said P and Q or R or S. Okay, so those are the different things that we worked with. So now what we're going to talk about are conditional statements. So a conditional statement is just a statement that can be written in what's called if-then form. So I just went ahead and wrote an example here of a conditional statement. So it says, if you would like to read, then you need to find a book. Okay, so you can just take any sentence and basically, you might have to add a couple words to make it flow, but you should say if this, then this. Okay, and the easiest way that we write this with a symbol is P implies Q is what this means. So we read that as P implies Q. Okay, so if you ever see this symbol, then I'm asking it to be an if-then statement. Okay, and remember P and Q, those are just two sentences, okay, or two statements. And what we are going to be looking for within these statements are what are called the hypothesis and the conclusion. So I'm just going to use this example up here that I have to get started. So if I ask you to find the hypothesis of this statement, the hypothesis is the part that always comes after the if. So the words or statement after the word if. Okay, so in this particular example, the hypothesis would be you would like to read. Okay, so this right here, that's my hypothesis. I'm just going to put HYP underneath it so we know that's the hypothesis. It does not include the word if. Okay, so that's really important. Do not include the word if. Okay, so that's really important. So it's just anything that comes right after it. So if, okay, then that means the hypothesis, you would like to read. Okay, the conclusion is the part that comes after the word then. So the statement after the word then. So in this sentence, it says then, okay, which means the conclusion would be you need to find a book. So you need to find a book. That would be the conclusion. Okay, so notice we don't include then and we don't include if. Really important. Okay, so on these sentences, what I'll do is I'll give you a statement and you'll have to identify the hypothesis and identify the conclusion, and that's pretty much it. It should be really easy. Okay. So here's an example. This one says, if the forecast is rain, then I will take an umbrella. So it just says identify the hypothesis and conclusion. So remember the hypothesis comes after the word if. So the hypothesis is the forecast is rain. Okay. And sometimes it'll tell you to circle it. Sometimes I'll have you write it out. Just depends on the wording. So that's the hypothesis. And then the conclusion always comes after the word then. So the conclusion is, I will take an umbrella. Done. So this is the conclusion. Okay. And that's it. Okay, so now what we're going to have to do is take a sentence that's not in conditional form and make it in its conditional form. So here's an example. It says, a mammal is a warm-blooded animal. So if it helps, figure out what the two parts are. So part P is that it's a mammal. Okay, so we could write that out. So we could, and you might have to add a couple words. So an animal is a mammal. Okay, so I added the word animal into it. Okay, so an animal is a mammal. And the other part of that would be that it is warm-blooded. So it is warm-blooded. So if I'm asking you to write this in its conditional form, that means P implies Q, then I'm going to have to write if, and then my P statement, and then write the Q statement. So I would write, if it is an animal, if, I should rewrite that, if an animal is a mammal, then, okay, so then I'm going to put, then it is warm-blooded. And that would be my conditional statement. So then I can look at what's my conclusion, what's my hypothesis. Well, the hypothesis is an animal is a mammal, and the conclusion would be it is warm-blooded. Okay, so all I did was take a sentence and I reworded it a little bit to make it a conditional statement, if, then. All right, and sometimes it'll be really easy to change the wording too. Sometimes you gotta add a couple words because the goal is that when you write the sentence that it actually flows like a regular sentence. Okay, it has to make sense. So you don't want to just put if and then and it not read really well. Okay, so be careful with that. The last thing that we're going to talk about, which is the main part of this section, are the converse, inverse, and contrapositive. So here I have a conditional statement. If it is a hamster, then it is a rodent. And we're going to write different variations of this particular statement. So if I'm going to talk about the converse, remember a regular one is P implies Q. So the converse is the opposite. It's Q implies P. So if I'm looking at this, I have to know what P and Q are. Well, P, the hypothesis, was it is a hamster. Q is the part that says it is a rodent. So remember, that's kind of like your hypothesis conclusion. So in the converse, I'm going to flip these. So I'd say if, and then I put the Q first. It is a rodent. And then you put the word then, and then I flip it. It is a hamster. And that would be my converse of the original statement. Okay, so all I did was I switched my hypothesis and my conclusion. The inverse is P is going to be the same order, but we're going to have negation. So not P implies not Q. So I'm not flipping anything, but I'm negating the entire statement. So I'm going to take my original and I would say, if it is not, that's important, a hamster, so there's my negation, then it is not, okay, there's another negation, a rodent. So same order, but negated. Okay. And then the last one, what's called the contrapositive, this is going to be where I flip it and negate it. So it would be not Q implies not P. So not only am I going to flip the original hypothesis and conclusion, but I'm also going to have the word not throughout. So I would say, if it is not a rodent, okay, so that was my original conclusion, now it comes first. Then I would say, then it is not a hamster. And I'd be done. So notice there are 3 different variations of an original sentence. Okay, so I'm looking at what order do I write them, and some of them I'm going to do the negation we talked about in the last section. Some of them I won't. So you need to make sure you know what each of these means, okay, what the converse, inverse, and contrapositive are, and also you need to make sure you know their symbols. So that's something that you might want to make flashcards for or something to study, okay, but that's really the majority of this sentence. And just like the last section, all of these things can have truth statements, okay, so if I look at the truth value of this original, or this one here, so if I said, what's the truth value? Well, if it is a rodent, okay, then it is a hamster. Is that always true? Well, no, okay, because I could find another rodent that's not a hamster, maybe a mouse or a rat or something like that, okay? So my truth value for this one would be false. So notice that these are going to have truth values just like our statements from the last section did. So if it's false, remember that you might have to come up with a counterexample or something similar to that. Just make sure you read the directions. Okay, so write these examples down. Make sure you ask questions in class if you need it. Otherwise, that's it. Thanks for listening.